Hello, and welcome to the Kingston Grammar School podcast. For any listeners who are newcomers to the podcast, Kingston Grammar School is an independent co-educational day school located in Kingston upon Thames in southwest London. With the school motto of work well and be happy ever present in all aspects of the curriculum and co-curriculum, Kingston Grammar School is one of the most successful co-educational schools in all of the UK. Alongside top-notch academics, an extensive co-curricular program including sport, theatre, art, and music also plays a central role in the success and well-roundedness of KGS and its students. I am your host, Shannon Delwish, and regardless of what brought you here or how you came to find us, I hope you learn a bit about Kingston Grammar School, and I know that as one of our listeners, you will start to feel more a part of the inclusive KGS community. We are happy to have you. This episode features Jo Blackshaw, one of our inspirational old Kingstonians, and she joined me to speak about her years at KGS and her recent experience rowing across the Atlantic from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean. In an epic effort that took the team of 4 mothers 40 days, their schedule required each of them to row for 2 hours, then I'd say rest for 2 hours, but really those hours were quickly used up doing boat maintenance, refueling their bodies, which burned 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day, and, sleeping. The idea of this excursion, quite frankly, blows my mind. In their own words, they are 4 busy working moms, juggling careers and families, and whilst they all approached this 3,000-mile rowing challenge for slightly different reasons, they collectively aimed to inspire their children and women of all ages, reminding them that the power of our gender has no limitations and no challenge is too great to overcome. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would love you to talk about your 3,000-mile trip from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean, which must have taken almost everything that you've learned along the way in some way. Every subject, every hobby, every skill you've ever learned. You must have used everything. How did you decide to take on this challenge, and how did it go?
So, having rowed at Kingston, and I rowed through university and loved it then. When I went up into the city, it was harder to continue to row at that level. I had to be at my desk at 6:30 in the morning. There was no way I could commit to a team in the right way, so I didn't row when I came up to London, much to my dad's disappointment. But I kept fit. I'd run marathons and I'd go on expeditions occasionally and climbed a couple of mountains or whatever. But I'd always heard about this transatlantic rowing challenge. James Cracknell, obviously a year above me, he then did it. I watched that documentary. So I kept periodically saying, I really want to do that one day. And after a while, you get quite frustrated with yourself because you're like, oh, I hate saying that too much because then you think people are going to lose belief in that you've got the courage of your convictions. Anyway, a 40-day row when you've got 2 children and you've got a career is quite a hard thing to contemplate. So I'd sort of put it on the back burner. And then a friend of mine's husband rowed it 2 years ago, the same race, and she then wanted to get a women's crew together. And she said, you've always said you wanted to do this. Are you willing to do it? And I'm a bit of a fatalist. And I thought, this is a golden opportunity for me to do this. So I said yes first and then kind of really looked into what it entailed afterwards, which was a little bit foolhardy. But I mean, every bit of it appealed to me. So not just the physical side of it or the race, the competition, but also the being self-sufficient, going on an expedition, being out in the ocean, being in a team again, all of that appealed to me. The only bit that didn't appeal was leaving my family for that long. And I found that incredibly hard. So that's how I came to do it. And there are certain prerequisites that you have to do, these courses, but also 120 hours in the boat. But fitting that in around our lives was just really hard. The best way to stay safe in any of these things and the best way to enter into any competition is to go through the hard knocks of training. So we had to carve out lots of time for all the important stuff. And yes, I mean, almost the easiest stuff was physically training. You just say, I'm going to get up at 5 and I'm going to do a 2-hour rowing machine. That's the easy bit because you're reliant on yourself. The bits where it was like, right, we need to have a call to discuss our nutrition. We need to have a call to discuss our mental approach to this. We need to have a call to discuss how we're going to deal with this and this issue. How do people want to communicate with home? The prep was so important. So I think when we left La Gomera at the start of the race, we felt that we'd prepared as much as we could. And that gives you a real grounding in like, okay, it gives you a calmness. We spoke to a weather router every day. So we were given, advice on what weather conditions were coming, what the wind was going to do. And that was super helpful. The race organisers were there if we needed to speak to them, and they run 2 safety yachts that meandered through the fleet. We never saw the safety yacht. We didn't need the safety yacht. And the reality is, and I didn't tell my children this before I left, but the reality is it can take a safety yacht 3 or 4 days to get to you. So yeah, there were challenging times. I mean, definitely times where you think, oh my gosh, but we didn't stop rowing once. I mean, one of my crew was seasick for the first 3 or 4 days. She just kept rowing and she was incredible.
Wow.
Incredible. Hand sores, bottom sores. You have to get off the boat and clean underneath because it grows stuff as it goes. So it grows algae, and then the fish eat the algae, and then other bigger fish like a marlin will attack. So one crew got a marlin spike through their boat.
Oh my gosh.
So you're jumping off in the middle of the ocean. You're obviously tethered onto the boat. And I actually enjoyed that bit because I enjoy swimming. But you do stop and think, there's 5 miles of water beneath me. And I'm here just attached by a climbing harness, cleaning underneath the boat. Anyway, it was very refreshing when you're really hot. We did it in 40 days. We were the 13th crew out of 35 crews to finish. We were second in the female category.
Wow.
We beat several men's crews. We beat several mixed crews. We were really proud about how we performed. But most of all, we have returned really good friends, soulmates. It was the hardest thing we've ever done, but we can genuinely say that it's a trip of a lifetime. And I think more than anything, just we were alone on the ocean for 35 days. I mean, we lost sight of shore and other crews after about 2 or 3 days. And we did not see another vessel. If something broke, we fixed it. We have a water maker that makes our own water. We carry enough food with us for around 55, 60 days, even though we didn't hope to take that long, we didn't. But you are keeping yourself alive. You encounter all sorts of weather conditions, 20, 30-foot waves.
Wow.
Claustrophobia, intense heat for days and days and days and days. It's grueling. I mean, utterly grueling. But understanding how you get through the tough times, how you work as a team together, how you treat one another is just, as you say, you draw on all sorts of life experiences and you dig very deep to get through the hard times. We raised £70,000. We were raising it for 3 really great charities, one of which was Women in Sport. And Women in Sport set out to encourage women and girls of all ages that they shouldn't be limited by their gender. And it promotes activity in sport. And it's also good for our children to see us doing that because that inspires them to want to do it too and to see the positive benefits.
Wow. I mean, obviously, massive congratulations. It's so inspiring. I mean, I don't know if I could do it, but it does make you want to go.
Yes.
Something. Yeah, maybe.
Our husbands looked after the children while we were gone. Our work enabled us the time to go and do these things, which we're incredibly grateful for. There's many more things that limit people from doing stuff than gender. And what we don't want to do is say, hey, anyone can go and row an ocean. I mean, I do think setting oneself manageable goals. You might have a manageable goal and you might have a stretch goal, but the confidence it builds in you when you do that. And believe me, rowing an ocean was a stretch goal. But the more you have to strive for something, the more rewarding it is. At the end as well.
Again, what an achievement. So take us back to the humble beginnings from whence you came. Tell me a bit about your time at KGS.
My experience at Kingston was great. I always enjoyed the academic side. I really enjoyed learning. I really enjoyed the subjects. And I think my teachers really brought those to life for me. I think up until the GCSE stage, it's all about sort of trying everything, making sure that you're kind of applying yourself. And then being able to sort of focus in on a few subjects for A-level was just brilliant. I studied modern languages for A-level and went on to study modern languages at university afterwards. But all that time, I threw myself into playing music. So I was in the orchestra, I was in the choir, I was in the CCF, I did rowing. I did way too much, to be perfectly honest. And the teachers and my parents kind of helped me kind of navigate that. And I had to probably give a few things up towards the end as academics and rowing kind of took over everything else. But no, I had a fantastic experience. I count myself very lucky.
I want to talk a little bit about the co-educational side of things. What is the value that you place on co-education now?
I think when you go into the working world, you're going to be in a co-educational environment. And interestingly now, when I've been in an all-female crew rowing across the Atlantic, and we are 4 of only 250 women who've ever rowed across an ocean. And, you know, all these stats come out at you, and my children have listened with interest. But my son said, I don't know why they keep talking about you as one of 250 women. Surely it makes no difference whether you're a woman or a man. in rowing across the Atlantic. And I found that just refreshingly open. And I think if we've got a generation that are coming through who think that way, then we're already breaking down those gender barriers.
Indeed. And it's beneficial to both genders to have the experience working within coeducational groups at school because it really sets them up for when they enter the workplace, doesn't it?
Yes. I think it's really important that boys learn that they may be working for a female boss, they may be working for a male boss, and vice versa. And I think it's really important that you start to learn those skills, those leadership skills, those teamwork skills from a very early age.
I completely agree. Now, in terms of life skills, how did your school experience at KGS influence the way you organized your time and how you might have, say, placed value on leading a more balanced life?
In terms of life skills, the ability to manage your time, the importance of academia and the value in learning. But at the same time, my mental health was very much helped by the fact that I had other activities. I could play music, I could go on the river, I could row, I had different friend groups. I didn't feel pigeonholed. I think that's as important in my career today as it was back then.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying about how mental health can be maintained or improved by diversifying your interests, because I think you're right. You get stuck into something, and if you don't have a break from it, then that's when you could go down some sort of rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, it's your inner confidence, that feeling of self, which I think is really important. Discovering yourself, knowing what you enjoy. It's important to strive to do well in your academia. But I think it's important that if one of those things doesn't go so well, you get a bad grade or you've not done as well in one thing, knowing that you have other things that you do which also help to build your confidence.
That leads me to the next question I was just going to ask about your experience with sport at KGS, which you've spoken about a little bit.
The rowing was second to none. It was just inspiring, really inspiring, and a sense of, that sense of teamwork and being proud to represent your school and being encouraged to go in and try and represent your county or your country is really palpable throughout, I think. Just the general fitness. I think just feeling that, knowing it's not just about, and this is something we focused a lot with my recent Atlantic rowing crew. If you have goals that you want to work towards from a physical perspective or a team perspective, that's fantastic. And I've enjoyed competing through the years. But I think it's just as important to know that you can enjoy sport at any level and enjoy the positive mental health effects from exercising. You're keeping fit, you're having those positive endorphins and that positive kick of mental health from being able to be active, and that sustains you through all areas of your life, whether it be puberty, whether it be later in life through the menopause, through injury recovery, through illness recovery. It really pays dividends later in life.
I think it's a really good point. In terms of your work experience, I just wanted to get a quick glimpse of your career path after leaving KGS.
I studied languages at Oxford, and then in my summer holidays to earn money when I was at university, I worked in a small broking firm and really enjoyed it. It was a different life. I hadn't done economics, I hadn't done business studies, but I worked on a trading floor and I worked in research, doing the most mundane of tasks, but working with some really bright young people. And they said, well, why don't you do this? You'd be great. Come and go on the milk round and apply for some jobs. And I put some application forms in and got some job offers and started work for a company called SG Warburg. It's now been merged numbers of times. It's now UBS. But I started work on the trading floor in 1995. I loved it. I mean, it was great. But again, it was a real man's world back then. I was the only girl on the sales force. I remember finding myself feeling pretty daunted, actually, thinking, gosh, I'm now on a big trading floor with people old enough to be my father, having not even studied economics or studied anything to do with this world. I was using my languages, so I was working very much with French, Belgian and German clients. I was traveling. I was learning about companies. It was all around investments. And I still work in investor relations for a real estate investment trust. And on Fridays, I volunteer at a secondary school teaching French and German. So I feel very lucky to have both those elements of stuff that I enjoy in my career. And it's great. I love the teaching. I've always just said, so long as I'm enjoying what I do and I feel like I'm able to learn all the time and develop all the time, then I'm happy in my career. Anytime that I'm really not enjoying it or I really don't feel like I'm evolving, then that's when I start to think, hey, is this the right thing to be doing?
It's so exciting to imagine just taking opportunities as soon as you're inspired to do so. Like you say, keep following your intuition. It's a good life philosophy. And that brings me to my final question, which is, what advice do you have for students?
It's a daunting world. I had a great school experience, but I wasn't happy all the time. There were times when I thought, oh, my best friend seems to be more friendly with someone else. You feel like you're on your own and there's people over there that seem happier than you. It's really, really tough. But I think perspective is so important, and perspective which enables you to grow and say, actually, they may seem happier than I am right now, but any one person at any one time has something that they're struggling with and finding challenging as well.
Yes.
So developing your empathy, but also that confidence in yourself that says, I'm not alone. And I think be honest about how you feel, not ashamed about how you feel.
Yeah, that's great advice.
When you've rowed across an ocean, you feel quite invincible, really. And you have this kind of halo effect. But, I've had a lot of self-doubt over the years. So don't be fooled by people's outward appearance or exterior. If they seem confident, they're not always as confident as they seem.
People do that, don't they? They compare themselves to other people, and then that turns into self-limiting beliefs.
Yep.
Jo, I can't thank you enough for taking time to speak with me today. It's been so interesting on so many levels to hear your stories and your advice and your outlook on things.
It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really grateful. I'm so glad I'm still in touch with the school and that Kingston Grammar School followed me through the race, and I can still be asked back. I'm really flattered to be asked, so thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Kingston Grammar School podcast. If you are interested in seeing more on Jo's journey across the Atlantic, I highly recommend checking out her team's Instagram account, mothership_TWAC, and that's a TWAC for Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, or her team's Facebook account, The Mothership. You can see some remarkable before and after snapshots of the rowers, as well as access posts, photos, and videos from their journey that might actually make you feel a part of the adventure. Also, the Atlantic Campaign's website is a great place to get content around the challenge if you're interested in the event in a more general sense. And that's www.taliskerwhiskeyatlanticchallenge.com. So that wraps up the 2022 series of the Kingston Grammar School podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed speaking with so many courageous and inspiring faculty and students, both past and present. Now, what kinds of topics would interest you for our next series? We'd like to hear from you, dear listener, so please tell us what you're enjoying about the podcast and get in touch to suggest topics which you'd like to hear more about. Email us at podcast@kgs.org.uk. There are so many places where you can access the podcast, so feel free to invite friends, colleagues, and family to tune in wherever they hang out, whether it's in the YouTube space or on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify or SoundCloud, to name a few. I mean, we are searchable and findable on all podcast platforms. And so there's no reason why, say, your auntie out there in Australia can't listen to us on Audible, or your daughter who's studying in Delaware can't listen on her Deezer app. Please tap that follow, download, or subscribe button so that you'll receive any episodes you haven't heard already, and so that you're notified when our new series is released. And take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It's super quick and super easy, and it helps our listeners to find us more quickly and easily. Thanks to our guest in this episode, Jo Blackshaw. And thank you always to the wonderful Allison Williams, Director of Marketing and Admissions at Kingston Grammar School. This has been an Applied Reality production, produced by Shannon Vandermark, sound design by Alex Marcoux.